episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
Welcome to Nature Backed, Paige.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us in a few words, how did Ocean Ledger start?
How did Ocean Ledger start? So I think, like most people, it starts with something you either love or hate. In my case, I spent a lot of time on and underwater. I grew up diving and sailing. I got my dive master when I was 18. Basically, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I was a kid that asked for textbooks during Christmas, and I pursued that up through university, and then I think I got a dose of reality in terms of what the job would actually be, which was not just diving in nice tropical places, but being in a lab for 5 years. And I decided I wanted to kind of get a bit of a broader perspective. I knew I wanted to do something related to the ocean. I think being a scientist was maybe not the path that I ended up wanting to do. So, I guess long story short, I ended up doing the complete opposite. I worked in banking at Barclays, and I did some strategy consulting down in London. And I think by the end of it, I was maybe slightly even more confused with what I wanted to do within the ocean space. But certainly I knew there were kind of a few more options. So I ended up quite serendipitously coming across my co-founder's research paper. He has the opposite background from me, which normally makes kind of a good founder story in theory. And he had spent 10 years focusing on how to take satellites and better map and understand ecosystems underwater. And so when I read his paper, off the back of having read a lot of banking reports that came out about this blue economy, which I honestly had never heard of, and deeply confused why banks were even talking about that space, I kind of made some links in my head between what he was doing from that monitoring perspective, going historically, and then the gap that these reports were calling out in terms of the monitoring, the granularity, assessing the impact of interventions, and reached out to him. And, kind of timing was right, as timing is really important in life. And he was just about finishing up his tech transfer project. And we decided, not sure what we're going to do here, but let's just make sure it doesn't collect dust on the shelf at the German Aerospace Center. So I guess that's how it started.
Oceans and banking, those two things sound as far from each other as possible. No?
Actually not. If you think about a bank, a big bank anyway, has assets and exposure all around the world. And the ocean is 70% of the world. So the Venn diagram for me is like this. Whereas for most people, I can see how, if you think about ocean, the way people talk about ocean, they talk about it in the way they care about their relationship with it, which, yes, is quite far from what a banker is thinking about and caring about. But I'd argue they're actually 100% overlapped.
Wow, that's quite different from, I would say probably from the average person's view, but I understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, imagine my challenge then.
So why is today Ocean Ledger? How far are you on your road?
On our road. So the road kind of technically started with my co-founder's research. So we didn't kind of wake up one day and say, let's make an app, and make an app a few months later. So there was a lot of thought that went into quantifying the condition is. But where we are today from a commercial perspective, we spun out a year and a half ago, and we raised our first round of venture funding back in January. An amazing impact fund called Ananda that also had one of the early investors in Nature Metrics. And, we're pretty much at the point where we're looking to launch, or kind of in the process of launching, the first product to the financial service industry, starting with insurance. So we've had customers at the site level, or it's real estate developers, engineering firms who are doing kind of the site-based work. But we're looking to kind of find the scale and the revenue to take us to the next milestone over the next 6 months.
I would assume these clients are not the fastest moving entities. The classical startup challenge of having a B2B sales pipeline of entities which take 6, 12 or 18 months to decide to actually buy. How are you doing on that equation?
I think one way that you can de-risk things slightly, well, two. One, build relationships, being a place where these people are, that expedites at least the yes or no. And then
coming from the industry where these people are, in your case, right?
Ideally, right. Unfortunately, I have no background in insurance, but learning the language and building relationships is one way you can de-risk that. But you make a good, and then the other way is just trying to focus as much as you can in what that problem is with the B2B segment, because when you're focusing on that product and sales process in the background, but you really need to minimize this, you kind of do have to be a little bit opportunistic. If there was revenue that came in for something that isn't perfectly aligned with that, B2B. So in our case, like, we get a big mapping project. Okay, we don't want it to divert our attention too much, but it's a huge mapping project. We can get, good amount of revenue that gives us an extra 2 months. So you just got to do the math in your head. How much will it distract us from landing that large deal or doing that product development for the key segment, versus being, saying no to revenue or grant opportunities that ultimately, if you can justify it as paid R&D, then I think it's worthwhile.
In most cases, absolutely. The product today, what is it? What are you selling to the insurance companies?
So it depends kind of which part, but I guess a simple way to deduce it is, we're a software where you can access pretty much a hazard assessment of storm surge and erosion directly into your own interface, or we have a dashboard that allows you to actually visualize that information, where it can be for multiple sites, one site. So you can give us sort of a list of addresses, and then we can go over a large area if they're a high concentration, or a specific area. We can analyze based on measuring historical erosion, the seabed, quantify any existing defenses, provide that historical insight and map for people to then plug that into the probabilistic scenarios they have on whether a hurricane is going to hit that particular place. It's pretty much a vulnerability assessment for people to better price the risks in that area, and then for the brokers on the advisory element to understand how to reduce those exposures over time if we understand what those key drivers are, which is what we can do by looking historically.
Probably looking at from a little bit from a distance, maybe the areas like Florida in the US is probably like a prime example of your potential business focus.
Yeah, it's a soft market. People have lost a lot of money there, but equally we're seeing increase in all these areas of population and construction, and then degradation of those natural defenses and new defenses being built. So there are all these nuances that one say, okay, you can't really just pull back, or you're losing out on potential revenue, but equally you need to capture what the nuance is and the up-to-date information in order to underwrite profitably. So that's kind of where we're trying to give people an edge.
Mm. Every now and then you see headlines that the insurance companies in Florida or California or in some other coastal areas are not insuring properties anymore, or new houses or new homes. That's
Yeah.
basically, what you try to, I don't know, help with or you work with.
In theory, there's a lot of, I will say there's a lot of, and again, I'm learning every day what goes into these decisions and affordability of insurance. The US market, of course, is unique, and that's why it's 50% of the market. But I think where we're interested in is eventually being able to provide the data and the insight where it does not exist. So what I call, and I kind of hate this term, but it makes it very clear to people, data poor regions of the world where you don't have your NOAAs, you don't have your big, and even then we're like not sure how NOAA's going to be super reliable in the future, right, with government funding. But areas where, your big cat risk, climate risk models have gaps, and those gaps then make it harder to underwrite or, to get maybe coverage. And so I think that's where we're seeing potentially huge opportunity. Caribbean, Southeast Asia, where there is actually a lot of like value and supply chain risk. And so going where others can't go, essentially.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Ah, Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant.
Whoa, that's refreshing.
And a 9.5 plus pH for every way you move.
I did take a spin class today.
Restoring like a pro. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Yeah, I was thinking that, people, some areas are probably data poor because of there is no financial need for that data. So no one has invested in gathering that data.
Yeah, it's the first, I guess, the kind of a developed world thing to have lots of public funding going into open source data sets, which cost $500,000 to millions of dollars to generate in the first place.
Absolutely. So what's your kind of the first target markets then? You mentioned Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think in terms of business priorities, I would say at least for the storm surge erosion severity product that is in the US, simply because that's where there's the highest concentration of risk. But I think we'll be able to then move into either the Caribbean or Australia, where we also know that those natural defenses play a really big role in terms of reducing that storm surge severity, so providing kind of enhanced view of risk. But yeah, I think it would be the US, and then we'll probably move out to Caribbean and Australia, but starting first kind of where there's the highest amount of value.
Of course, makes total sense from the startup perspective. Storm surge, how does that work? How does it work, the storm surge analysis? You probably, the other founder would be better one to reply to that.
Well,
but
a lot of people use physics.
Sorry.
There's physics-based models, and there are ones out there that people like build themselves, amend kind of off-the-shelf ones. And so there's a spectrum, right, in terms of how good that physics model is, which is kind of telling you where that flood depth will be in the case of a hurricane. It's classed as a secondary peril. Basically, it's people just saying wind is the main thing that causes damage. The flooding is like secondary, which I would argue is actually not necessarily true. But the point is, it's usually a component of someone's model. And for us, like, our USP is not necessarily that storm surge modeling aspect. It's how that coastline is shaped in terms of under the seabed. So if you have a shallow seabed, if you have mangroves, if you have even rocks, And then, of course, how that shoreline has changed, like the location of the shoreline has changed over time from erosion. That's the picture that we paint that will influence, if there was a lot of storm surge, where exactly that damage will go. And that part is kind of a physics thing. Like if you have beach nourishment programs, like we saw in Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, the last updated information on the shoreline that every model is using today is like 5 years out of date. And so we're saying, well, in those 5 years, there's actually been crazy amount of beach nourishment because the state knows it's a problem. And so they've done something about it. That's not being factored into the ratings for the properties along that coastline. And that's what we can kind of pick up as an updated change to the shoreline.
And you use satellite monitoring to update the data continuously, or how does it work?
Yeah, so technically we can update it every 6 days. I haven't yet to meet someone who needs it updated every 6 days. But the point is the frequency of updates is hard to find, actually. There are companies like ISI where that is one of their huge USPs, is that they can update it immediately because they have their own satellites. With us, we're agnostic, so we can use whatever satellites are necessary for that monitoring frequency or the resolution. So it's possible to do really frequently to assess damage or to ensure that you're capturing any changes on a quarterly basis.
What's the long-term view? In 5 or 10 years, where do you want to be with Ocean Ledger?
I think we just want to be, I guess, world class in terms of providing risk management, not just to businesses through, say, insurance, but to governments as well. I think everyone says what we do is super niche, but actually coastal flooding, hurricanes, storms, erosion, earthquakes.
It's a huge thing.
It's a huge thing. And they're happening more frequently. The return periods that people refer to, that 1 in 100 year storm is actually 1 in 10. And so I think, us focusing on insurance is because, okay, it's a 1 year time horizon, but really we can go out to those sea level rise, longer forecast scenarios. And I think Ocean Ledger is really well placed to drive the systematic change between that insurance and broking community and then those insured clients themselves, like those ports and real estate developers that we've also worked with. So acting as that link in terms of getting, unlocking the funding from, say, a bursary deployment from an insurer to then reduce exposure to storm surge, whether it's through building a seawall or restoring a wetland that we can prove is reducing storm surge. That for us is like the holy grail. I don't really want to be doing anything else besides connecting brokers to insured clients to brokers, and us acting as a go-between to obviously make people more money and try and place more deals, but ultimately to help those communities and those businesses along the coastline have the money, the means, and the insight to reduce that exposure kind of starting today and not in 10 years.
Absolutely. Kind of starting to wrap up, you started off from, being born in the ocean. What was the last ocean swimming experience for you? How long it has been since you were in the ocean last time?
That is a really, really good question. I think the last time must have been, wow, yeah, you kind of stumped me there. I'm trying to think of the last time I've actually went sort of swimming in the ocean. Been in a lake kind of recently, but it must be actually when I was at a friend's house up in Scotland. I was I was swimming in the North Sea. It was very cold. That was months ago though. So it's been a minute. This is a good push.
Absolutely.
Should certainly not jump in the Thames, but find a
no,
body
yes.
of water immediately.
Not Thames, yes. That makes total sense, please. Good. Thank you, Paige, and good luck on your endeavor.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.
Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
We're the founders of Electrocast Media, bringing you great podcasts like Nightmare Road Stories, Tech Talk Revolution, and Bodacious Minds.
Electrocast networks include Ruby for female empowerment, the Best Business Network, and GPN for geopolitics. We built this company to create community and amplify diverse voices, and we really appreciate your support.
So, keep listening to Electrocast podcasts and hear the culture.
Electrocast.
Ever thought about starting your own podcast?
Do you have a business or a message you want to share with the world?
Well, now it's easier than ever with Electrocast. Hi, I'm Mark Netter.
And I'm Peter Rafelson. We're the founders of Electrocast Media.
Whether you want to start a new podcast or already have one, join Electrocast to grow your audience, monetize your content, and build your community.
With our simple sign-up, you get free promotion, world-class analytics, premium ads, and personal support.
Go to electrocast.com and join our community today.
Electrocast. Transform your influence.
Electrocast. Electrocast.